NBA MVP tier list 2000/01 season. When we did the 2000 season, we saw a very respectable top 10 list with an all-time great season from Shaq. Let's see how the top 10 MVP vote getters look from 2001. And we're not starting out very well. Number 10 was David Robinson. So he was placed in the top 10 for two reasons. This person had the best record, and they wanted to award someone other than Tim Duncan. And they were the number one rated defense in the league. David played a big part in that. No one's denying that. But when you're averaging 14.4 points and 8.6 rebounds per game, that's not top 10 worthy. What's even more frustrating is that players such as Ray Allen were snubbed, who had a great season. Vince Carter had the best individual season of his career, and we can't even talk about it. They were much more deserving. So while talking about MVP caliber players, this should be placed low. So we're putting this in the E row. The ninth place finish was Kobe Bryant. This is his first top 10 finish. And we're looking at the numbers, he wasn't given the respect that he deserved. He averaged 20.5 points, 5.9 rebounds, 5 assists, and 1.7 steals per game. He was an All-NBA defender, and he was fourth in scoring. Keep in mind that Shaq was third in scoring. This is the only pair of teammates, other than the duo of Jerry West and Elgin Baylor, where they both average over 28 points in the same season. For them to produce those kind of numbers in that era is noteworthy. But that's not what the media was focusing on. They were paying attention to the Shaq and Kobe feud. They were looking at the fact that they lost 11 fewer games than the previous year. The narrative was that Kobe's selfish style of play was the reason that they weren't dominant. The real reason is that both Derek Fisher and Ron Harper missed a large chunk of games. So they didn't have a point guard to run the triangle offense. They lost their third best scoring option in Glenn Rice, and the Isaiah Ryder experiment wasn't panning out. And they went from being a top 2 defensive team in 2000 to being the 6th worst. Those were the real reasons. Yes, it's true that Kobe would have the bad habit of going 1-on-5 during possessions. This was a time when the jokes about Kobe being a ball hog really took off. But you can make the case that they needed Kobe to step up on offense during this time, and that's what he did for a team that had the second best record in the league. So we're not saying this was an all-time great season from the Mamba, but I would have placed this just outside the top 5. So we're going to put this in the C row. The 8th place finish was Jason Kidd. You know, I'm surprised he's even on this list since he had himself a very busy year. He led the league in assists for the 3rd straight year. He also finished 4th in steals. He had another great all-around year, and he led the Suns to win 51 games. He even had his career high this season. Against the Houston Rockets, he had 43 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 4 steals, and 2 blocks. After the game, this is what Hakeem Olajuwon said. He's good, but not that good. I don't know what to do with that information. But I guess in a way, this is how we all felt about him. We knew he was good, we just didn't know how good. We surely got that answer in the following seasons, but this is something that we were asking ourselves during this time. His greatness was being questioned. I think finishing in 8th place is fair, which is why we're putting this in the D row. The 7th place finish was Karl Malone. This is his last top 10 finish of his career. He finished in the top 10 in MVP voting for 14 straight seasons. Talk about sustained excellence. And we're talking about a team that still had an old core. They're still relying on Karl Malone and John Stockton to run the offense. They did bring in some young talent like Donyell Marshall to help alleviate some of the scoring load. But they were still playing the same old hits, and they won 53 games. They had the 3rd best offensive rating in the league. You just couldn't stop them. And every once in a while, Malone would give a virtuoso performance. He had 41 points on 72% shooting, 13 rebounds, and 4 blocks against the Sixers. He could take over games when needed. But this was a year when we started to see signs of decline. It was the fewest points that he averaged since his sophomore season, and his fewest rebounds since his rookie year. This wasn't a classic Karl Malone season, and he certainly had many better ones in his career. So we're going to put this in the D row, respectfully. The 6th place finish was Tracy McGrady. He went from being a bench player in Toronto to finishing just outside the top 5 in MVP voting in Orlando. He really was a surprise of the year. Remember, he was expected to play the supporting role to Grant Hill. This was expected to be his team, but he only played 4 games and he was out for the rest of the year. This team was placed on the 21-year-old shoulders. And this is also a team that had the 6th youngest roster, and they were a bit undersized. Despite all of that going against him, he balled out. The numbers that you see on the screen really highlight how immensely skilled he already was. He wasn't at his peak offensively, but defensively, he was all over the court. The one game that really highlights that was against the Washington Wizards. The dude had 49 points on 61% shooting, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 blocks, and 2 steals. It was nights like these where he looked like the most skilled player in the league, and he had enough of those to really make an impression. This season from T-Mac deserves our respect, so we're going to put this in the C row. The 5th place finish was Kevin Garnett. Now his scoring, rebounding, and efficiency went down just a little from the 2000 season. The Wolves also won fewer games. That explains why he went from a 2nd place finish to a 5th place. But in reality, this was a continuation of what he did the previous year. He averaged over 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists for a 2nd consecutive season. He finished runner-up for the Defensive Player of the Year award. So he was finally getting the recognition he always deserved for what was probably his biggest strength. He did a great job of carrying a team that was the least talented out of all the Western Conference contenders. They were the A seed, while the other 7 teams won over 50 games. They won 47 games, which at the time was the most out of any 8 seed in history. We're certainly not blaming him for where this team landed. This is a top tier season for one of the greatest power forwards ever. It's not quite MVP level, so that's why we're putting this in the B row. The 4th place finish was Chris Webber. This is unquestionably his greatest season of his career. He posted his career high in points and various advanced metrics. The numbers that he averaged were something that only the all-time greats accomplished. He averaged over 27 points, 11 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. The only players at that time to post those numbers were Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem, Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson, and Bob McAdoo. And these were all players from the pre-merger. He was arguably the most versatile player in the game. On top of that, he led the Kings to their first 50-win season since 1965. They were also the highest scoring team in the league. Of course, they had a lot of players who contributed to that, but they had a tremendous advantage of having a 6'10 forward that could run the floor, pass the ball, and handle the ball as if he were a point guard. This was an excellent season from C. Webb. He deserves to be in the B row. The 3rd place finish was Shaq. He's complained many times that he believes that he should have won more MVPs. Well, this is the season that he should have won his 2nd MVP award. He was clearly the best player in the world. He proved that in the playoffs. But he got in his own way. We discussed already that the Lakers lost 11 fewer games and were nowhere near the same dominant defensive team. Well, Shaq deserves some of the blame for that. He publicly stated that the house won't get guarded if he isn't the big dog. And you can tell he wasn't putting the same attention and effort on defense as he was in his MVP season. That was the biggest difference. But if you look at the numbers, it's basically the same as the previous year. He was the same dominant force. The MVP was his to lose. If only he put his pride and ego aside, he could have had arguably the greatest 2-year stretch in history. So I'm going to put this in the A row. It's a step below the 2000 season, but it's up there. The 2nd place finish was Tim Duncan. Now he started out the season slow. He had some ugly shooting games and was scoring in the teens regularly. In his defense, he suffered a serious knee injury in the previous year that sidelined him for the playoffs, and he postponed the surgery until after he made his decision to stay with San Antonio. So he was trying to play his way into shape. But in the second half of the season, his game really picked up. He was averaging nearly the same numbers as his 2002 MVP season from the last 40 games or so. Despite his offensive struggles early on, he was consistently one of the top defensive players in the league. The Spurs were the top-rated defensive team, and Timmy D was a big reason why. If he played as he did in the second half of the season for the entire year, he could have won the MVP. This would easily be in the A row. But since it wasn't a complete body of work, I'm going to put this in the same row as Kevin Garnett and Chris Webber. And of course, the MVP of the 2001 season was Allen Iverson. Was he inefficient? Yes. Were his advanced metrics low for an MVP winner? Sure. But with him, you have to throw the numbers out the window. If you were there to witness it, you could say without a doubt that he owned the league that season. He was the biggest draw, the biggest storyline, and what he did that year was super influential. What's even crazier to me is the way he changed people's perspective of him. He was the media's biggest punching bag during this time. But after seeing the way he impacted his team and made his teammates better, they couldn't help but admire what he was doing. We all know that the Sixers didn't have a great offensive weapon outside of AI, but he drove them to take on his personality, and they played hard all the time. That's what made this team so special. And they won 56 games, the most in the East, and the second best overall, along with the Lakers. On top of that, he became the only player, along with Michael Jordan, to lead the league in points and steals. He had 2 50-point games, along with 15 other 40-point games. In the end, he became the shortest and lightest player to win the MVP. For him to do that in a much more physical era, dominated by big men, was and still is very impressive. As far as where I'm putting this, I think the A row is appropriate. It's not 1988 Michael Jordan level, but deserves to be a tier below. So that's the 2001 season. It's evenly distributed. You got some great to not so good seasons. Let me know in the comments what you remember from this season and how you would rank the players. Till next time.